From private right in the state of nature, there proceeds the postulate of public right. When you cannot avoid living side by side with all others, you ought to leave the state of nature and proceed with them into a rightful condition, that is, a condition of distributive justice. Immanuel Kant. In my 3 previous lectures, I discussed what Kant calls the private right or private law, private justice, depending how you want to translate it. I talked about the issue of translation in my lecture on the difference between right and ethics. And this is the right as it should be, according to reason alone. This is our duties of right that we should follow, that we are obliged to follow. But of course, the problem is that in the state of nature, there's nothing necessarily compelling us to act according with what right demands. Now, what is the state of nature? This is something that is relevant not just to understanding Kant's philosophy of right, but rather to understanding the philosophy of right in general. This is something that more or less all the theoreticians of right in the 18th century subscribed to. You can go back to definitely to Thomas Hobbes, and then everyone who came after him, more or less. It is the idea of a state of human beings, a state they live in, where there is no state, there is no laws, no lawgiver, and no one to enforce the laws. So what's important here is that when you hear humans living in the state of nature, you don't necessarily have to think of primitive humans, you don't have to think of cavemen. Also, in the Stone Age, people might have lived in the state of nature, but that's besides the point. And this is not about technology. So you could, if you wanted to, you could imagine people living in the state of nature and yet having very developed technology. No, the point is nature here refers specifically to the juridical. So this is about people living simply in nature, just like animals do, and being ruled only by the laws of nature, but not by any laws in the legal sense, not by any laws that a state has given and a state enforces. And so in the 18th century, when you talked about right, what is right, you would probably think about the state of nature as the opposing state. And in this state of nature, you have only what Kant calls the private right. But people could hypothetically come together and form a contract, the social contract, with one another, and thereby found a state to enforce the right. And thereby they would be leaving the state of nature. And thereby they would transform the merely private right into public right. And what's important to Kant is that both of those, the private and the public right, materially, that is, when it comes to their content, they overlap. They can be the same rights, right? So, according to private right, for example, you shouldn't murder other human beings. And then when you have a state, the state will probably also make it a law that you shouldn't murder. They don't necessarily need to always overlap, because Kant distinguishes different types of rights according to his table of categories, where there are three types of modality, right? Possibility, existence, and necessity. And so Kant would say there are necessary rights, that is the natural rights, like, for example, the right of human beings not to be killed. And precisely because they are necessary rights, even in the state of nature, that anyone should respect, when there is a state, the state should take these necessary rights, these natural rights, and make them positive law, that is, make them actually existing rights. If the state doesn't, if the state goes against the natural rights, it would be an unjust, it would be a despotic state. But then there's also possible right or possible law, which is what Kant calls the statutory laws. That is laws that are somewhat arbitrary. Unlike the necessary laws that are natural rights, these are not laws dictated by reason. There's no necessary rational reason why we should drive on the right side or on the left side, or why we should stop when the traffic light is red and go when it's green, and not the other way around. This is somewhat arbitrary, making this only possible rights. Those are laws that the state can give, but doesn't necessarily have to give. And two different states could give different laws here, but both could be equally just. So that's why the public right is not necessarily materially identical to the private right. They have the same content when it comes to the natural rights, but the public right can add the only possible statutory rights. But even in the area where they are identical materially, they are different formally. While they both may give the same duty, for example, don't kill another human being, they do so in a different manner. Because in the state of nature, there is no higher power enforcing these laws and compelling people to do what is right. In the state of nature, let's stick with you shall not kill. For not being killed, I depend either on the goodwill of my fellow human beings. So maybe they choose not to kill me because they're actually good people. But then this is not about right, this is about ethics. And otherwise, in the state of nature, I depend on my own strength, right? So if someone tries to kill me, I can, of course, defend myself. And I even have a right to do so. Indeed, that is how the right in general is defined by Kant and distinguished from ethics. I discussed that in the lecture on the difference between rights and ethics. That Kant says the duties of right are those duties that come with a right of compulsion. So I have a right to compel other people to do their duties. That is not the case with the purely ethical duties. But when it comes to the duties of right, I have the right to force other people to, for example, not murder me, or to not steal from me, or to not burn down my house. If they try, I have the right to use force, use violence if need be. to make them stop. But of course, in the state of nature, while I can defend myself, it's questionable if I will actually be able to. The other person that attacks me could be stronger. Now, this is precisely the reason why we do need public right. This is the reason why we should form a social contract and some sort of state, because here you have a sort of higher will, the will not of a specific human being, but the will of the whole, expressed by the lawgiver who, in a proper state, in a republic, is the representative of all the people. And that will is declaring laws, is declaring the rights of people, and is also enforcing them. So now I am more secure, right? Because, for example, for not being murdered, I don't have to rely on either my neighbor's goodwill or my own strength to defend myself. But now there's murder is forbidden by law, and there's a punishment for murder, and there's police enforcing that, and that might surely not make murder impossible, but that might actually make some people who otherwise would try to murder me not do it. I will point out as a side note that this is one of the instances where Kant could have realized that the right must be completely separate from morality. I discussed that in the lecture on the difference between ethics and right, that to Kant, both together form morality. So morality is sort of the umbrella. But Fichte, who is more consistent, more thorough in this, has properly separated them. And I think here Kant could have realized that there is not really any right in nature, in the state of nature. What there is ethics, is morality. People can act good, people can not harm others because they are good people. But the proper right is only the public right. All right in the state of nature is just an idea, it's just provisional, but only when the right gets publicly declared and enforced do you really have rights. Now, you could argue that the Englishman Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century was the first great modern political thinker and great modern thinker of statehood. And Hobbes famously described the state of nature as a state of war of all against all. Precisely because there are no laws, anything can happen, anyone can do anything to anyone, and it's a lawless jungle. It's a state of might makes right. Kant somewhat corrects this view. Kant maybe doesn't have quite as pessimistic an opinion of human nature as Hobbes did, which is not to say that Kant, on the other hand, has as optimistic an opinion of human nature as, say, Rousseau did. Nowadays, because we live in a quite cynical age, people would often say that it is naive to think that humans are just good and that without laws they would not wage war on one another, which is certainly true. That would be naive. But let's be honest, it's not any less naive to just believe that humans are evil and that all that is keeping us from jumping on each other and murdering each other brutally, and all that is preventing from total breakdown of society and total chaos is just laws and the enforcement of laws. No, Kant is saying that the state of nature is not necessarily a state of actual war of all against all, but it is a state of potential war, and that is enough. It's not a state necessarily of actual enmity, Kant says, but it is a state where war is always possible. So, in other words, in the state of nature, there can always be a ceasefire, but there can never be true peace, Kant would say. But this is an important correction. In Kant's day, I already said, other theologians also started with the state of nature. But they would say that its opposite, the opposing state, the state that is created through the social contract, is the state of society or the social state. And here Kant disagrees. He says that society is, at least hypothetically, possible in the state of nature too. The state of nature is not necessarily a state where every human being has to run away from one another and isolate himself, and where everyone has to be a hermit because human beings would just kill each other on sight. No, in the state of nature, you could still have friendships, you could still have families, you could maybe have clans or whole villages. But what you could not have is true security. Because let's face it, it has happened that even friends that had been friends for 20 years started fighting. Or it has happened that after 20 years of marriage, someone has tried to murder his wife. So while some sort of society, some sort of social life, humans living together, that is humans living without fighting, is possible in the state of nature, it is also possible for fights to break out at any time. And that is why Kant says the state of nature is a state of perpetual injustice. Not because actual material injustice is necessarily done all the time, not because all the time someone tries to kill me or tries to steal from me, but because I'm always threatened with injustice. So at least formally, injustice is currently happening. If the mere denial of justice, if the mere denial of me being secure, truly secure, and confirmed in my rights, is already considered an injustice. Kant, for that reason, says that the opposite of the state of nature is not the social state, but rather it is the civil state. The state where we are citizens of some sort of state, of some sort of commonwealth, that gives us our rights, that confirms us in our rights, and that enforces these rights. In the state of nature, the problem is that war, while not necessarily happening all the time, can break out all the time. And Kant would say it can break out even without people actively being evil. Because all of right is about what Kant calls the mine and yours. So about property. It is about what belongs to whom. And justice is the state where everyone gets what belongs to him, right? Where everyone gets what he deserves. If you think about what we consider unjust, it all comes down to someone having property that is not his, or someone not having the property that should be his, like people being poor while others are billionaires is probably unjust, because those poor people also deserve property. So it's all about property. And Kant would say that all war there is essentially about property. It is about the mine and yours, and people disagreeing about what is mine and what is yours. Someone saying what is mine should rather be his. That is what leads to us fighting over this. And now the point is that this fight can, of course, break out because someone completely disregards my rights. Like, let's say in the state of nature, I have a house with a garden and I have a fence around the garden. Sure, someone could just climb over the fence and could steal from my garden, could steal from my house. That person would clearly be not a righteous, not a just, not a good person. But there could also be genuine conflicts where we both think we are in the right. Like, let's say, this is one example of Kant's. Let's say a bird is flying over my land and I shoot the bird because I want to eat it. But now the dead bird actually falls down beyond my fence into the garden of my neighbor. And now, let's say I say that this bird should be mine because I shot it, but the neighbor thinks it should be his because it's now on his land and not on mine. And here conflict could arise, right? And this is not a conflict. Neither of us is actively trying to be a thief, to steal from the others what is their property, but rather each of us thinks that this is rightfully his property, right? It's entirely possible that this neighbor is generally a good guy, that I lived for 20 years next to this neighbor, and he would never have tried to climb over the fence and to take something from my garden. And that if the bird I had shot had landed in my garden within my fence, the neighbor would have left it to me. But only now, because it landed in his garden, does he claim it for himself. Now, the point to Kant is that in the state of nature, in his opinion, there still is a right answer. The answer that reason gives to whom should the bird belong. And in Kant's opinion, it should belong to the neighbor, not to me. Because, and I discussed this in my previous lecture on the original acquisition and on Kant's theory of the ground, to Kant, original acquisition, so something, in this case the bird, which does not belong to anyone at first, becoming someone's property, original acquisition to Kant can only happen through the original ownership of the ground. So things that are on my ground, on the piece of land which I own, and are not owned by somebody else, I can now apprehend these things and declare that I want them to be mine, and through that apprehension I can make them mine. So to Kant, all property is derived from the ground. So it doesn't matter that I shot the bird. What matters is that it is on the ground of the neighbor. But that's besides the point. The point is that Kant believes there is a correct answer, the answer that reason gives. That's why we have private right. But the problem is that we don't necessarily agree in the state of nature that this is the correct answer. And it's not enforced. The problem is in the state of nature, everyone is his own judge. And of course, the potential victim or the accuser should not also be the judge. And even if I was impartial and not ruled by my own private self-interest, still there was no way for me to enforce my own judgment, to force the other to comply with my judgment, except my own strength. So that's why in the state of nature, if a dispute over the mine and yours arises, again, it doesn't have to constantly arise. It's not that there has to constantly be a war. But even if two people are well-meaning and don't mean to steal from one another, there still can be a genuine dispute over the mine and yours. And if that happens, and it's not a case that one of them can convince the other, or that one of them just chooses to abstain from what he thinks would be rightfully his, then the only possible solution is for them to fight. The only possible solution is war. And here, clearly, it will not be the case that the one who is actually right wins, but it will be the case that the one who is stronger wins. In the state of nature, Kant says, there can be justified ownership, but there can never be just or rightful ownership. By this he means that in the state of nature, you can claim ownership of something, and you can be justified in that. That is, this can be something that, according to reason, you actually could rightfully own, right? I mean, in the state of nature, if you have something because you stole it from somebody else, you're clearly not justified having it. But if you go on a piece of land that does not belong to anyone, and now you build a house here, and you start farming the land, and you claim this as yours, since it didn't previously belong to anyone, and since you are the first to apprehend it, you are justified in claiming it. But that does not mean that it is just that you have it. That does not mean that you are the rightful owner, because no one has yet granted and confirmed this right. And you, in turn, also have not granted others their rights. You have not confirmed them in ownership of their property. This is precisely why the state of nature to Kant is a state of perpetual injustice. True justice can only be established with the civil state through public right, because here you have a general will represented by the lawgiver, which confirms that you are justified in owning this. And only through that do you become the just, the rightful owner. So that is precisely why we need to leave the state of nature, and why we need the civil state. And this is why there are two types of justice to Kant. So he didn't come up with those two terms. These two terms and this distinction goes way back to antiquity. But Kant takes this up and says there is commutative justice, and there is distributive justice. And he says that in the state of nature, there can be justice if people happen to act just, if people happen to be good people that act in accordance with what is just. but this can only be commutative justice, which you could maybe also translate as exchange justice. So you can be just in what you exchange. For example, when you make a contract with somebody, you can actually give what you promised to him. You can actually give him his payment instead of withholding it. That would be a just act, of course. But that would only be commutative justice that happens between the individuals. The distributive, so the giving justice, is the justice that gets established through public right, and it is a justice that actually gives out or actually deals out justice, that gives people what is theirs, that confirms them in their rights and thereby secures the right. So distributive justice, or the public right, has only one single task to Kant, and that is creating and securing perpetual peace. I said in my lecture on the innate and the acquired right that the private law, according to Kant, is only about one thing. It is about freedom. Or more precisely, Kant would say it is about restricting my free choice as much as is necessary for the free choice of other people to exist alongside me. So I can make my free choices, I can act and use the objects in the world however I want, but only insofar as it does not take the freedom from others. Like if I kill somebody or if I steal from somebody, I would interfere with his own choice. I would take from his freedom. Now, I said that all right is about the mine and yours, is about me only sticking to what is mine and not interfering with what is yours. And all conflict, all war, therefore, arises when there's a conflict over what is mine and yours. And the public right should solve or prevent such conflicts. And therefore, it should prevent war. Therefore, it should create not just a temporary ceasefire, but rather a perpetual peace. And this is really the only task that any public law has. Secure the mine and yours, distribute justice, give everyone his due, and thereby make sure that there is no conflict, no war over the mine and yours. And of course, when you hear the word war, you may first think about wars between countries. But to Kant, the public law actually has three, you could say, levels. There is state law, there is the nation's law, or nowadays we would say international law, and there is cosmopolitan law. Kant doesn't outright say why specifically these three levels, but usually when there is such a distinction within Kant in his system, it's not random, but rather it is through his architectonic principle derived from his table of categories. I already gave a lecture on this architectonic method, saying that to him in science you should not come up with random divisions, because then this is not systematic, this is rhapsodic. You never know if you found all divisions that there could be, or if maybe there are some you overlooked, but rather you should start from a principle of reason that a priori, that is before you look at experience, gives you the necessary divisions that now when you do go into experience you can fill with whatever you experience. And I also said that Kant's architectonic principle is mainly his table of categories. I gave a lecture on the table of categories where I explained it. And I also gave a follow-up lecture where I explained how that table of categories is really the key to Kant's whole philosophy, and how you cannot understand him beyond understanding singular thoughts, how you cannot understand him systematically without understanding the table of categories, because Kant says there are these 12 categories, these 12 basic concepts of our intellect that rule all our thinking. And that means that everything we can think, in this case, when we think public law, must be thought along the lines of those categories. And well, I would say that these 3 levels of public law can, for example, be described by the categories of quantity, which are unity, plurality, and totality. So you could say state law is about one state, the law within one state, and it is about creating a perpetual peace between individuals, right? So that there's no fight over the mine and yours between individual people. And then the law of nations, or the right of nations, is about the plurality of states and creating perpetual peace between states, so that states don't fight about the mine and yours, for example, about some land or some resources or whatever. And then lastly, the cosmopolitan law is about the totality of humankind and making sure that there's peace even between states and individuals from, let's say, from faraway lands. I will further explain what Kant says about all 3 levels of public law in upcoming lectures. But here I want to stay with public law or public right as such. Now, all public law is built, at least according to the idea of reason, is built on a social contract, a contract between individuals, a contract between states. On all levels of public law, you have a contract. And this is one of the main reasons why Kant categorically forbids lying. I already gave a lecture on that topic, why lying is immoral, even if you can save a life. This is something that Kant discusses in various places. But most famously, there's a little essay of his on a supposed right to lie out of love for humanity. And very often that essay is being misunderstood. It is very infamous, often gets criticized, but what people often overlook. And I will admit that if you are not familiar with Kant's theory as a whole, it is easy to overlook. I myself didn't realize that when I first read that essay, but only when I had familiarized myself with Kant's whole system. In that essay, Kant is not talking from an ethical perspective. He's not saying their lying goes against ethics. It also goes against ethics, to be sure, but that's not his focus there. But rather, his focus is the perspective of right. The ethical reasons why you shouldn't lie, I have discussed in that previous lecture that I mentioned, but I also mentioned there that his philosophy of right hinges on people not lying. And here you can see why. Because the social contract, of course, needs truthfulness. In general, right does not require us to be good people. Indeed, you could argue that if everyone was good, right would not be needed, because ethics would be sufficient if everyone just followed the ethical demands, right? Like, if no one wanted to murder, we wouldn't need a law placing a prohibition on murder. So the right and the laws are there precisely for those people who are not good, to force them to at least outwardly act somewhat good, even while their hearts may still be evil. But there is one thing, Kant would say, one, you could say, one act of goodness, or one instance of goodwill, that cannot be enforced by the right, but rather that is the necessary fundament of the right, and that is truthfulness. That is that you don't lie. Because once again, the right depends on a contract. So imagine people in the state of nature, all coming together to discuss what laws there should be, what kind of state they want to found, and to form a social contract. This needs trust. I mean, imagine I'm saying, okay, I promise not to kill you, and here I'm giving away my weapons, my means of killing you, and also my means of self-defense, in return for you promising to not kill me and to give away your weapons. Now, imagine I do that, trusting your promise, but then as soon as I put my weapons away, you keep your weapons, and now you use them to kill me or to enslave me or whatever. Or likewise, imagine people coming together to form this social contract and discuss it, and some person is staying away from that event and is using everyone being there, everyone being in discussion, to go through their houses and steal from them. So we need some sort of truthfulness, of trustworthiness in this one regard. And you could maybe argue that with each higher level of the three levels of public right, this becomes more important, because with each higher level, you less and less have some sort of executive power that enforces the law, right? Like in statewide, sure, within one state, the state is nearly all powerful. It has the monopoly of power, and it can force the individuals in the state to follow the laws. But then if you have the right of nations, that is international law, there's no higher power above the states. So this depends much more on the states being trustworthy, right? The states may form a contract, like they might sign the UN Charter, they might sign some contract on human rights, on the laws of war, and so on. But this is harder to enforce, so they need to be truthful when they signed it, right? And then finally, in cosmopolitan law, I mean, if you have a state dealing with, let's say, a singular refugee, the refugee is completely at the mercy of that state. The refugee has no rights at all, and here you very much depend on being able to trust in promises. So that's why you could say that lying is not just evil on ethical grounds, but also it makes the right impossible. And therefore you could say that to lie is the worst violation of human rights that there is, because all the other rights of humanity depend on truthfulness, depend on people agreeing on a social contract, and actually being truthful when they agree on it. Which does remind me of Hannah Arendt, who of course, who considered herself a political thinker, not a philosopher, and to her, politics depended on the plurality of man, on the fact that we are not just man in the singular, because if you are a single human being on a lone island, there's no politics happening there, but rather on the fact that we are man in the plural, dealing with other men. And to Arendt, politics as such is not about truth. In politics, you deal precisely with the plurality of man, and therefore with the plurality of perspectives and opinions, and you try to come together in your plurality. And here, truth has something tyrannical about it, Arendt says. If you insist on truth in politics, you basically want to abolish politics. You want to enforce your truth, because truth leaves no room for different opinions. Truth is something others cannot disagree with except by simply being wrong. But while in politics themselves, it's more about perspectives and opinions and compromises and discussions, and not so much about truth, Arendt says that still truth is needed for politics. And she says at some point that truth is the ground on which politics stands, and the white sky under which politics happens. Because while there can be a plurality of perspectives, it still needs to be perspectives of the same thing. Politics is about the world to Arendt. So the world that we inhabit, that we share with one another. That's why to her, for politics, common sense is very important. She calls common sense the sixth and the highest sense, because all our other senses are essentially subjective, right? I don't know if what I see is real or if it's just a hallucination. Or you have these common questions. Is my red really the same as your red? Is my sweet the same as your sweet? Maybe the things that taste sweet to me taste salty to you, and we just give it the same name. All of these are questions you could ask to the other five senses, but common sense to Arendt is the highest sense, because precisely through common sense do we inhabit not just our own individual world, like we do in our dreams, but a common world, a world that we share with other human beings. And now we can have different opinions about this world and about what matters in this world and about how this world should be shaped, but we should at least inhabit the same world. And the great danger, the abolition of true politics, comes about to Arendt when common sense and when the same world is lost, when people live in parallel realities, when people have their alternative facts, or when they end up not living in reality at all, when they end up cynically not believing in anything at all, which is an unfortunate condition of the modern world, one that we once again very much see in our times, right, where the people within one country it's not just that they don't agree how to deal with something, like how to deal with climate change, it's that they don't agree that there even is the same thing, right? It's that many just say there is no climate change, or no, Moscow actually isn't an imperialist despotic power that has attacked Ukraine, but actually it's the other way around. Ukraine is somehow evil, or no, there is no genocide in Gaza. When this happens, it's no longer about different perspectives where you still have some common ground, but rather the very fundament for us coming together in politics is lost. And this, to Arendt, is the wood from which totalitarianism can arise. So that's why she says, while within politics itself, it's not precisely about truth, we do need truth as the ground politics stands on and as the sky beneath which politics happens. So once again, this would be one reason why Kant so vehemently opposes lying. If you want to get further into that, once again, you can go back to my lecture on that. But now back to the public law and the foundation of the state. Kant takes up the three slogans of Ulpian. Ulpian was a famous late Roman jurist who was very influential. And in the 18th century, when Kant lived, jurisprudence, the legal theories, they were very much influenced by Roman law. I mean, this is still true, of course. Nowadays also, our whole legal tradition in the West is very much rooted in the Roman tradition. But back then, people were even more conscious of it. And it was probably even more obvious, like in the whole terminology used and so on. And Ulpian famously had these three slogans, these three mottos that expressed what right, what justice is supposed to mean to him. And these three are Neminem leadere or Neminem leadere, which means harm no one. Secondly, you have suum cuique tribue, which means give to each his own, often also shortened to just suum cuique, to each his own. And out of these three principles, this one is the one that is still most well known, that is most often used in normal conversation, but it is used wrongly nowadays. It has shifted its meaning. Nowadays, people often think this is an expression of taste. Like if I say, I don't like what you are eating there, I'm eating my stuff that you don't like, then you can say, okay, to each his own. But that is not what Ulpian meant. What he meant by it is to each that which is properly, which is rightfully his own, so to each that which he deserves, right? So to each his property, to each what he is due, so to someone, to the debtor, whatever I am in debt with, and to someone I have a contract with, whatever I promised him, and to the criminal, whatever punishment is fit for his crime, and so on. And this expression describes what justice means, what justice is. That is basically the definition of justice, right? To each his own, to each whatever is properly his, whatever he deserves. Also, at least here in Germany, the this principle has gotten somewhat a bad reputation nowadays, because the Nazis wrote it at the gate of the concentration camp Buchenwald, which was one of their concentration camps. It was the one that was mostly used for political prisoners, for ideological enemies, and so on. And they wrote the German translation, jedem das seine, at the gate. obviously they still interpreted it not as an expression of taste and of everyone having his own taste, but rather in the original sense of an expression of justice. Um, but they were using it to mock the inmates, to say, well, this is just, to each his own, and this, being imprisoned here, having to work, being killed, this is your own. This is all you deserve, or in other words, you have nothing. There is no proper, just property for you. Which is why the German expression, like many people will not associate it with that. Many people here too use it to describe everyone having his own taste. But then you will always have someone who will say, no, this is an expression of the Nazis, you mustn't use that. But of course, that also is a bit ridiculous. We cannot throw away a principle that has been used and expressed for, well, about 1,800 years, and that perfectly does describe and encapsulate what justice is, just because the Nazis abused it. And anyways, the third principle is Honeste, vive. So live honestly, live an honest life, live with honor, live with decency. These are Ulpian's 3 principles of right, and Kant takes them up and interprets them in his own way. Now, let's start with the third principle, because that one we can actually put aside, because according to Kant, it's not about right at all. I say that Kant fails to fully distinguish ethics and right, but we can certainly say that in antiquity, they failed at that even more so. They mixed up these two areas, morality and right. And Kant would say that this principle, Honeste, vive, while it is a good principle, it is not a principle of right. Rather, this to him perfectly describes what ethics is about. And because he would say that ethics is about what is on the inside. I discussed that in the lecture on the difference between ethics and right. The right deals only with your outer actions, but ethics deals with your will. And the actions here are only secondary as realizations of the will, but what matters is the will. And Kant would say that honesty or honor is not simply about your outer actions, but it is precisely about your actual will, your actual inner attitude. Consider a craftsman who, those would be his outer actions, who doesn't trick his customers, doesn't trick them for their money, and who also tries very hard to always hone and improve his craft, to always get better and to produce the best possible products. Now, the question is, for what reason does he do that? If he doesn't trick his customers, then he is doing his narrow duties. I discussed that in previous lectures, that to Kant all moral duties are either narrow or wide duties, and there are also at the same time either duties towards myself or towards others. Not tricking others would be amongst the narrow duties. I should not harm their rights, while trying to improve at my craft, that would be amongst the wider duties, right? If I'm a shitty craftsman, as long as I'm not pretending to be better than I am, as long as I'm not trying to pass off shitty products as good products, I'm not really harming anyone's right, but still I'm not being as a human being should be, and I'm certainly not perpetuating anyone's purposes. Neither am I helping others with their purpose because they probably want a good product, um, nor am I furthering the purposes of humanity in myself, because humanity should be cultivated um, as much as possible. So that craftsman would be doing his duty, but maybe the reason he doesn't trick others is because he fears if that would come out, he would lose all his customers. So maybe he thinks that he could make some more money in the short term, but in the long term, it would cost him money. And maybe also the reason he constantly tries to improve at his craft is because he thinks this will bring him more customers, right? Now, if that were the case, and let's say these motives would somehow be known by the customers, so they would know that the only reason he's not tricking them for money is because he doesn't want to lose them as customers, and the only reason he's working so hard to deliver good work is because he wants to win new customers. That would probably not make them stop buying from him, because at the end of the day, they don't care about his character, they care about the product they buy, right? They want a good product. But it will probably make them lose respect or reverence for him as a person. While on the other hand, if he doesn't trick his customers simply because he's a good person and he knows this would be wrong, and if he tries to constantly improve and to produce the best possible product because out of some work ethics, because he actually wants to be good at what he does and he actually wants his customers to be satisfied, then he would be an honorary man, right? So then he would live according to this principle, Honeste, vive. And Kant says that what this is about, and here he gives the example of Socrates, about whom no one would believe anything bad if he was told of something bad that allegedly Socrates had done. What this principle should mean, Kant says, is you should live in such a manner that no one would believe anything bad of you. So if there was people talking behind your back, if there was some rumor about you having done something bad, if you truly live an honest life, if you always act with honor, then people would probably not believe that rumor about you. Even if it were true, I mean, maybe you really have done something bad. That's not the point here, but the point is always act with such honor and dignity that people would not think you're capable of something bad. I'm thinking of some years ago when I had one of my students, a girl who was still in school at the time, coming to my home because I was tutoring her. I was helping her with some presentation or something for school, and she is of an Arabic background. This is an area here with lots of Arabic, lots of Turkish immigrants, and many of them are a bit more conservative. It's not so common here for a girl to come home to a man and be alone with him. And so one of her friends from school was like, aren't you afraid to come home to a man? Aren't you afraid that he's gonna rape you? And she just laughed in that friend's face and said, no, I'm not, vaping would be against his philosophy. So that sort of reaction, I think, is a very good example of what Kant means. You should live in such a manner that people think, okay, you have this philosophy, you have these principles, you are a man of character, and they don't believe, even if you may have done something bad at some point, they would not believe it of you. And so this principle, Honeste, vive, is the principle of the ethical duties. And in particular, Kant would say it describes the duties we have towards ourselves. Because, and I already gave an earlier lecture about that, about the duties towards yourself, because this is about living with dignity. This is precisely about loving your honor more than you love your self-interest, more than you love even your life. But we are dealing here with the right, so that leaves us with the other two principles. So of these two, the principle Neminem, leadere, so harm nobody, Kant says this could also be understood as an ethical principle. In that case, it would describe specifically the duties of the narrow kind. So not the wider duties. The wider duties are about furthering the purposes either of other people or of humanity and yourself. But the narrow duties are about having reverence for the rights either of other people or of humanity in yourself. So you could describe doing your narrow duties as not harming anyone, right? It's not about helping someone, that would be the wider duties, but it is about not harming anyone. And Kant says this principle could be understood not just as describing the narrow duties towards others, but also as describing the narrow duties towards ourselves, if by harm nobody we also understand don't harm human nature in yourself. Don't harm your own humanity. But while this principle can be understood as an ethical principle, it can also be understood as a principle of right. And here the thing is, Kant says that the two principles of Neminem, leadere and suum, cuique, tribue, so harm nobody and give to each his own, materially, so when it comes to their content, to the actual consequence of following that principle, what that would actually mean, they are identical. And they are just two ways of expressing the same thing. Because if you think about it, harm nobody means that you should give to each his own, right? Because if you don't give to somebody what is his due, if you don't give to somebody what would be rightfully his, you are harming him in some manner. And on the other hand, give to each his own means you are not harming anybody, right? If you are giving everybody whatever he deserves, whatever is rightfully his, then you are not causing any harm. So in that sense, understood just materially, just by their content, both statements mean the same. Both imperatives have the same content. And therefore, this would be tautological. We wouldn't need both of them because they would just be two different expressions for the same thing. But Kant says formally, so not by their content, but by the form, how they express it, they are different, right? Because one statement is negative, it tells you what not to do. And one statement is positive, it tells you what to actively do. And for that reason, Kant says we could interpret them as the first being the principle of the private right, and therefore of the commutative justice, and the other being the principle of the public right, and therefore of distributive justice. Right? Because in the state of nature, when there is no laws, when there is no state enforcing the laws, your duty is indeed neminem leadere, harm nobody. That is, take from nobody what is his by rights. So that is a negative commandment. But Kant would say, at the same time, even if you're not actively harming someone by, let's say, stealing his property or by harming his body, so harming that which is his by birth even, by your very existence, you are threatening him and thereby harming him. So by staying in the state of nature, which once again is a state of maybe not actual, but at least potential war, and is therefore a state of perpetual potential injustice, by staying in the state of nature, you are necessarily constantly harming the other person. So that very principle, don't harm anybody, already gives you the duty to leave the state of nature and the state of mere commutative justice. Now the other principle, give everyone his due, or give to each what is his, that is by Kant understood as meaning go from the state of nature into the civil state, go to the state where we have distributive justice. Because give to each his own, Kant says, in the state of nature makes no sense. Because in the state of nature, everyone already has what is his. I mean, that is what it means for something to be yours, right? I cannot give you what is yours, because if I give it, then clearly it wasn't yours, it was mine. I can only give what is mine. Now, through the act of giving, it becomes yours. Whether I sell it to you, whether I gift it to you, it now becomes yours. But before it was mine. So Kant would say it's self-contradicting. It's an absurd statement, taken literally, to say give to everyone what is his. In the state of nature, and here you can go back to my previous lecture on the original acquisition, what is ours is that which we have actually apprehended. So the ground that we have apprehended, and then anything that is on that piece of land. And it is that which we can defend from other people. So in the state of nature, actually giving to each his own as a commandment makes no sense. Kant does make the remark that in the civil state, it does make sense. It can be understood in that sense. Because in the civil state, it is possible that something that would be mine in the state of nature has been taken from me. That is the case when you compare the rich with the poor. And I already alluded to that in the previous lecture on the original acquisition. Kant says, since in the state of nature, we can only own rightfully what is on our land, and we can only own as much land as we can defend. So we cannot own many square miles of land, because there's nothing we could do if someone were to step onto that land on the other hand. For that reason, there could not be a big gap in wealth in the state of nature. A big gap in wealth is only possible if it is somehow enforced by the state. If somehow the state, let's say someone has lots of land, somehow there's a police, there's a state, there's laws that secure that land, that secure much more land than an individual in the state of nature could secure. And so Kant says, if there's a big gap of wealth in a society, in a state, it must be due to some injustice. It cannot be, Kant says, for example, that some people in his day, like the nobility, own so much land, much more than in the state of nature an individual could possibly defend, while others, poor peasants, own no land at all and have no other choice but to work for those nobles on that large land that the nobles own. That, Kant says, can only have happened through injustice. Maybe the noble who currently owns that land didn't himself commit that injustice. Maybe he inherited that land from his father, and so is the rightful owner by the state's laws. And maybe his father inherited the land from his grandfather, and so on. But at some point back in the past, maybe as far back as the foundation of the state, there must have been an injustice. There must have been someone who somehow stole a lot of land from other people, from the forefathers of all these now landless peasants. Because once again, in the state of nature, it could not have been that some person has so much and others have so little. So there must have been some sort of force, some sort of violence involved. And now the state, with its laws defending property rights, is defending this injustice. And therefore, here, the imperative "give to each his own" can actually mean give back what was stolen, can mean that the rich person has a duty to give to the poor person, which is why it can be justified to tax the rich person and to have some sort of social security, social benefits to give to the poor person. And Kant would say this is not charity. And this is not something. This is not just amongst the wider duties. This is not something the rich person should simply do if he was a good person, because that would be a nice thing to do, helping other people. But no, Kant says this is actually the right of the poor people. They are not receiving what belongs to the rich person and what he gives out of the goodness of his heart. And therefore it's also not theft if the state enforces this by taxing the rich people, but rather the poor people are just receiving back what was stolen from them. They are just receiving back what in the state of nature they would have. In the state of nature, they could have their own piece of land that they farm, and the guy that is now rich would not have the power to keep them away from there. He could only defend his own land. So they are only getting back what was stolen from them and what they would have if there was no state and no civil society in the first place. I think this is a very important remark of Kant's, so I will also say that there isn't much consequence, there isn't much that Kant concludes from here. He does say it would be just for the poor to receive back what at some point must have been stolen from them and what in the state of nature they would have. But there is no real theory of social justice in Kant. He does already recognize the social injustice. He does already recognize that there's a big gap of wealth and that this cannot have come about through just means and that this is somehow enforced by the states. But ultimately, he is still part of the liberal thinking of the 18th century that for the most part accepts the property distribution as it happens to be at this point of history, and for the most parts accepts that the state's role is to secure property as it is distributed now, not so much to redistribute it. This is something that starts a generation later, right? So already in Fichte's legal thinking, in Fichte's doctrine of right, this is very different. Here, he does think very much about redistributing wealth. And then, of course, at the start of the 19th century, after the French Revolution, you have the early socialists, and then some decades later, you have people like Marx and Engels. But that goes beyond Kant. Kant does not yet have a real theory of social justice. This is definitely something that is missing. But I would say the germs are there. The principle from which you could deduce such a theory is there because Kant does already recognize the injustice, even though he doesn't really present much of a theory of what to do about it. But anyways, so this imperative, give to each what is his, can make some sense in the civil state, but in the sense of nature, it makes no sense because here already everyone already has what is his, and something which somebody doesn't have cannot be rightfully his in the state of nature. So then, if the statement is to still make sense, it can only be interpreted in one manner, Kant says, and that is in a negative manner. So not give to everyone what it is his because he already has it, but grant it to him. That is, give him security in what is his. So confirm him in his rights. So in the state of nature, I can grab a piece of land, build my house there, start farming there, build a fence around it, say this is mine, but I'm not secure. In theory, somebody else could along, tear down my fence, destroy my field, burn down my house. So I'm not asking that other person to give me the field, give me the house. I already have them, but I'm asking him to give me the promise that he will respect my fence and that he will not destroy my field, that he will not destroy my house. So in that sense, suum, cuique, tribue, give to each what is his, to Kant means leave the state of nature and enter a social contract where everyone is confirmed and secured in their rights, in their property. That is the demand. So in that sense, distributive justice to him doesn't mean so much that the state actually distributes the property. People already acquired the property in the state of nature, but it is that the state distributes their rights, that the state actually says, yes, this is your rightful property, this will now be secured as your property. And this is a demand of justice that we can make from everyone. So once again, in the state of nature, you can say to everyone, Neminem, leadere, don't harm anyone, so don't take what is theirs away. But since the state of nature as such harms me, because it constantly threatens me with what is mine being taken away, you can also say, suum cuique tribue. Give to each what is his, not by actually giving it to him, he already has it, but by giving him security, by actually confirming that this is rightfully his and therefore will not be touched by you or by others. And as a side note, I will say that the way Kant interprets these three imperatives of Ulpian, maybe that is not how that ancient legal scholar himself meant his statements. Maybe when he was formulating them, he was thinking of something else and trying to express something else. But that's not important. What Kant is doing here is precisely what you should always do when reading a text, he would say. I already much earlier gave a lecture on what and how to read according to Kant. And there I explained this. Of course, you could read a text and ask yourself, what did the author actually mean? What was his conscious opinion that he wanted to express? But this is a question that doesn't matter so much. I mean, at the end of the day, what does it matter to me? What some other individual who, as an individual, can be wrong, just like anyone, what his opinion was. Especially an individual that has been dead for almost 2000 years. Who is Ulpian to me at the end of the day? No, this is a question that can only concern the historian, like, for example, a biographer who really wants to write a biography of a person, of an author, and therefore wants to write about what he believed in. But the philosopher is not concerned with the empirical. The philosopher is concerned with reason alone. So Kant says, when interpreting a text, don't ask what the author wanted to say, ask what he should have said. So ask what is the most rational possible interpretation that can be found for these words. So the interpretation where these words speak the most reasonably, where these words make the most sense. In other words, ask yourself, not if this person had said those words. This person might have been right or wrong. He might have thought some nonsense, whatever. Ask yourself, what if reason itself had spoken through that person? What would reason itself have wanted to say and to express with those words? And indeed, in a way, you can maybe say that reason spoke through that person. You can say that that person had some sort of rational inspiration, that person at least unconsciously had a correct rational principle that he tried to express, but maybe he was not quite conscious of his own principle. Maybe he, in a way, misunderstood himself, misunderstood his own reason. He sort of had a correct sentiment, but didn't yet fully grasp what was at the root of his sentiment. So maybe he had the right inspiration, said something that was well expressed, but maybe he himself did not fully understand what it should mean. So he himself, consciously, maybe meant something else, but that's not important. We should, Kant says, understand an author better than he understood himself. And that's something that Kant mainly does when he's reading Leibniz, and I talked about this in previous lectures, and when he is reading the Bible, and I will talk about this when I get to his philosophy of religion. But here you also have an example of him doing this with these three imperatives, these three principles of Ulpian. From this follows an important conclusion. To leave the state of nature and to enter the civil state, where everyone's rights are secured, is itself a duty of right. You owe it to the people that are your neighbors. You owe it to them to secure them in their rights, to not just not harm them, not take what is theirs, but also to give it to them in the legal sense, that is to confirm it. And since this is a duty of right, others have a right of compulsion here. Once again, you can go back to my lecture on the difference between ethics and right. As I explained there, and as I already repeated here, the duties of right come with a right of compulsion for other people. So when someone attacks me, wants to kill me, or wants to steal what is mine, I have a right to fight him off. That is, I have a right to force him to not kill me, to not steal from me. And just like that, since by the mere fact that someone in my presence who is not in a legal community with me, who is not under laws that protect me, his mere presence is already an attack, even if he doesn't directly attack me. For that reason, I have a right to force him into a contract with me. So if you are in the state of nature, like let's say you are stranded on a lone island, and you explore the island, and then you discover that there's someone else already stranded on that island, you now have every right to say to that person, let's form a contract. I will agree to not harm you and your property, but in return you must agree to not harm me and my property. And if that person does not agree with that, you have every right to attack that person. So this leads to Kant's theory of just war. To Kant, there are only two conditions under which a war can be just. Now, of course, a war of subjugation, a war of conquest, a war of extermination, those are unjust wars. Those are wars that should not be fought, and if I start them, I'm evil. But there are two types of just wars. The first, most obvious one would be the defensive war. So, of course, if somebody else attacks me, and again, this is true on the individual level, this is true on the level of states, doesn't matter. If someone else attacks me, I have a right to defend myself. But to Kant, there is even one type of, you could say, war of aggression. So there's one type of war where I don't just react, but where I actually start the war. That is still a just war. And that is precisely, you could say, the war to end all wars. That is the war to force others into a shared legal community with you. That is something you are allowed to do. You don't have to wait, in other words, in the state of nature, till somebody attacks you. You can, if you suggested forming a contract and the other person disagreed, you can see that as an attack already. So in a way, this type of just war is also not a war of aggression. In a way, it is also a defensive war, but it is a preventive defensive war. You don't wait for the attack, you attack first, because refusing to give you security already is a sort of attack. I mean, think about it. So let's start on the level of individuals. If an alien was landing in our midst, we could, from the very moment he steps out of his spaceship, we could ask him do you come in peace? And we could tell him, we already have laws in place here. You landed not in the jungle, not in the Wild West, you landed in a state. So if you do come in peace, then submit to our laws. If you do come in peace, then you must agree to follow our laws, to not murder anybody, to not steal anybody's property. And in return, you will also be protected by these laws, just like any human guest, any human tourist would be. The laws will also forbid us from killing you, from stealing your spaceship. Maybe you can, if you want to stay, even apply for citizenship of this state. But if the alien were to reply, actually, no, I don't want to respect your laws. I don't want to restrict my freedom in that way. I don't agree that this property here that you already own belongs to you and mustn't be touched by me. But I still want to be here for a while. I still want to live among you for a while. I want to walk around here and look around and so on. Then we don't have to wait for that alien attacking us. We could say, no, if you say that you won't respect our laws, if you say that you won't respect our property, even if so far you have not broken the laws, it still means that you want to keep the possibility open for yourself. Why should we have to suffer that? It now means that we could not feel safe with you walking around amongst us because we don't know what you might be doing. So in this case, Kant would say, we would be well within our rights to attack the alien and to drive him back into his spaceship and to force him to fly away. Because that's what you can do. If someone wants to stay in the state of nature, if someone disagrees to submit to a shared law together with you, then you can force him to either submit after all to the law or to leave your presence. Because if he's somewhere far away where he can't hurt you, then this is not a problem, right? So you mustn't simply kill that person, but you can use force to protect your own security. And I mean, this is how we do think about strangers in our countries, right? Like in our days, this is what discussed when refugees come here. You always hear people saying those refugees should respect our laws, should submit to our laws, should not be suffered in our midst if they commit crimes. And to be sure, many of those people who say such things are racists, but the racism here is just assuming that the refugees all will be criminals, that they will not submit to our laws. That is a prejudice, of course. But the demand as such is not unjust. You are within your rights. If someone comes here seeking refuge, seeking asylum, you should not just deny him based on a prejudice, but you have the right to say, well, if you want to live amongst our legal community, you also have to follow our laws, you have to accept the property as it is distributed here. You cannot take anyone's property. And if the refugee does not do that, then you have a right, of course, to send him away again. That is to use force to deport him. And the same is true on the level of states. Kant would say, if you have a state and you have barbarians living beyond the borders, like imagine, this is maybe not such a modern scenario, but imagine the Roman Empire, then the people within the state have peace, right? Within the state, the states whose laws has created perpetual peace. That is, if the individuals in the state, if between them some conflict arises about the mine and yours, then They don't have to fight over it, they don't have to wage war on one another, but rather they can go to the judge and let the judge judge according to the state's laws what is mine and what is yours. But the problem is, if there are barbarians beyond the borders, like the Germanic tribes that might attack Rome, or like the Mongols that might attack China or whatever, the problem is that now the people in the state, of course, especially those living by the border, have to live in constant fear of an attack. And again, what matters is not if an actual attack already took place. Maybe so far the barbarians have been peaceful. Maybe they don't care to attack the state, or maybe they would like to, but they are too weak and therefore they don't attack. But the problem is that they could. Maybe if an opportunity arises, they could attack. And the state and the people living in the state, and especially the people living by the borders, don't have to suffer that. So the state, Kant would say, would be within its rights to send an envoy to those barbarians and to say, let's make a contract where we respect the borders, where we, the state, agree to not go beyond the borders into your land, but you must also agree to not go beyond the borders and attack our land. And if the barbarians don't agree to that, then the state would be right to declare war on the barbarians, to either force them under the law, that is to conquer their land, but that is important for Kant, not to subjugate them, not to enslave them, but rather to make them proper citizens with all the rights. Or if that's not an option, or if they refuse to become citizens, then it would also be rightful to drive them away, to say, we don't want barbarians at our borders, so move elsewhere, seek some other lands for yourselves, but if you don't want to live under law with us, then we don't want you as our neighbors. And I think many people, if they were to reflect on their sentiments and try to find the principles behind those sentiments, would find that they indeed agree with this definition of a just war. I mean, consider something like the Second World War, which is probably amongst the more uncontroversial cases of a just war. Here, you have Britain and France declaring war on Nazi Germany when Nazi Germany attacked Poland. Now, if you were of the strict belief that the only just war is a direct war of defense, then you would have to say this was unjust and France and Britain were being the aggressors. Because then you would have to say that, sure, Poland had the right to defend itself against the Nazis, but France and Britain were not attacked in that moment, so they had no right to declare war. But that would be an absurd statement, because if you think that's true, it would mean that if there's one aggressive imperialist power on the continent, it could pick off other countries one by one, because only the country directly attacked would have a right to defend itself. No, in fact, France and Britain, when Germany attacked Poland, were well within their rights to say, okay, clearly, within this European community of nations, Germany is behaving like a wild rabid dog, and we don't have to suffer having someone like that in our neighborhood. If they are attacking Poland now, if they are not respecting Poland's borders, they could attack us today, so better to act now. So this declaration of war, even any contracts of mutual defense with Poland notwithstanding, was perfectly legal and justified. Indeed, they didn't even need to wait till Germany declared war on Poland. it would have been justified to declare war on Germany much earlier. To declare war when Germany effectively destroyed Czechoslovakia, to declare war when Germany swallowed Austria. Actually, I would say the very moment that Germany left the League of Nations, right? The League of Nations was sort of the predecessor of the UN, had been founded after the First World War. Germany, before the time of Hitler, had joined, but then under Hitler, already some years before the Second World War, Germany left the League of Nations. In that moment, all the other countries in Europe in the League of Nations, I say with Kant, would have had a right to attack Germany. Because why would you leave the League of Nations? What reason would you have to do that? The only reason is if you want to later wage war. Even if you don't declare war in the very moment you leave the League of Nations, what you are saying is basically, we as this country, as Germany, don't accept any higher law above the countries and their sovereignty that we would submit to, but rather we leave this legal community. We want to be in the state of nature with other states. We want to live in a sort of Wild West, and we want to reserve the right for ourselves to do whatever we want, to attack other states at any opportune moment. That very act of leaving the League of Nations could already have been interpreted as effectively a declaration of war, and could have been answered as such. And likewise, when you look into our own day, I would say that the states of Europe, that the EU would be perfectly within their rights if they were to declare war on Muscovy. I mean, for one, we already are effectively in a war. Many people don't want to see that. Many people deny that. Going all the way up to our politicians. But the problem is that a war can be declared from one side alone, and then you are in a war. You cannot just say, no, I don't want to be in a war. A war can be forced upon you, and that's what has been done. I mean, the problem is, even if we don't consider ourselves to be at war with Muscovy, Muscovy for many years now considers itself to be at war with us. And they act accordingly. There have been many attacks, like drone attacks, terrorist attacks, acts of sabotage all over Europe. And of course, there has been a lot of propaganda. I mean, this is very well known and documented, that they try to divide the West, both Europe and the United States. That there are whole armies of internet trolls employed, and that Putin and his cronies have played a large part in things like Brexit, Trump's rise to power, the rise of the Nazis here in Europe, Nazi parties in various countries. But even if we put all of that aside, simply by the way Muscovy has acted towards its neighbors, how it has attacked Ukraine, how before that it has attacked Georgia, and so on, it has shown that it is a rogue state which does not accept international law, which does not accept the borders of its neighbors. And it stands to reason that if, for example, it defeats and conquers Ukraine, then next it will attack other states, like the Baltic states. And so, therefore, we would have any right in the world to attack them first and to fight against Muscovy till Putin is in The Hague and Muscovy submits to some sort of international law and peaceful coexistence. And likewise, I would say, if a country does not accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, like Muscovy once again, like China, like the US, like Israel, that alone would give any other country who is in the Rome Statute, who does accept the International Criminal Court, the right to attack that country. Because why would you not accept that court? I mean, the International Criminal Court is there to punish individuals like leaders, presidents, generals, whomever, who commit war crimes, who commit crimes against humanity, who commit genocide, who are not punished by their own country. If you don't want to accept that court's jurisdiction, then again, what you are saying effectively is we don't accept any supreme law that we would submit to. The highest law that we accept is our own law, our own sovereignty, and we refuse to be judged by anyone else, by any higher institution, for how we act towards other countries, other people. So in other words, what you're saying is we want to be a rogue. We don't want to be part of a legal global community. And that alone should be a sufficient reason to declare war. Likewise, if you don't want to enter certain international contracts, like on war crimes, on the banning of certain weapons, I would say on the banning of nuclear weapons. Like, why would any country have nuclear weapons? If you have nuclear weapons, you automatically are a threat to all other countries. So all other countries would have any right in the world to attack you and to force you to abolish the nuclear weapons. And to be clear, when I say all of this, I'm talking only about rights. I'm not talking about what would be politically prudent. So, of course, Europe declaring war on nuclear armed Muscovy, maybe that would not be the most prudent course of action. Maybe that would not be the best possible way to deal with Putin. And likewise, declaring war on nuclear powers like China, like the US, to force them to abolish their nuclear programs, maybe that would not go so well. But that's another question. That's a pragmatic question. It's not a question of rights, right? Something can be legally your right. That is, it would not be unjust if you did it. And it can still at the same time be a stupid action that would be harmful to yourself. Those are two different things. And to Kant, sure, he is a rigorist. I've talked about this in my earlier lecture on is Kant's morality too strict and unrealistic, because that is what nowadays, in a time of moral relativism and in a time where almost no one has firm character, firm principles, that is what Kant often gets accused of. But him being a rigorist only means that he says you mustn't ever act against the right. So, sure, his principle is fiat justitia et pereat mundus. Let there be justice even if the world should perish over it. But what that means is that you must never go against what is right. You must never harm anyone's rights. So you mustn't, for your own gain, break with what is right. You mustn't commit an unjust action for some greater good. That is never allowed. But what is allowed is, of course, to abstain from your own rights. I mean, I have the right, for example, here in Germany, you mustn't be loud after 10 p.m. So you should be quiet at night so that other people can sleep. So if after 10 p.m. My neighbor is listening to very loud music, then I do have a right to call the police and thereby force him to stop. But I don't have to make use of that right? I can also tolerate his music and say, okay, I will let him listen to the music some longer. And that's not what Kant means when he's talking about ritualism or about fiat justitia et pereat mundus. He's not saying necessarily make use of any right you have, necessarily enforce all your rights. He's only saying don't act against the right. So to him, there are prohibitions, and those you must respect. You must not do an act that is prohibited by reason. But then there are also rights of permission. That is reason permitting you to do certain things because they are within your right. But those you don't have to do. You can do them, you are permitted, but you don't have to. And this waging war would be such a right of permission, right? Like, let's again go back to the state that has barbarians at its border. The state can, of course, live without attacking the barbarians. Maybe the state thinks they are no threat, it's not worth it. We have built a wall like the Chinese wall or the Hadrian's wall or whatever. That's enough security. The state has no strict duty to attack these people. That's not what Kant is saying. All he is saying is that the state would be within its right to do so. And so I want to clearly separate that. I'm not saying we should necessarily declare war on Muscovy. I'm not saying that would be the most prudent course of action. I say for pragmatic reasons, we should probably not make use of that permission reason gives us. But what I am saying is that reason does give us the permission. It would maybe be stupid, but it would not be unjust to attack a nuclear power. And this whole right to declare and wage war in the name of right, in the name of justice, in the name of lawfulness, comes from the fact that, well, the state of nature is a state of lawlessness, right? And there should, however, be law. There should be a rule of law. And if you go back to the categorical imperative, I discussed the most well-known formula of the categorical imperative in my lecture on the categorical imperative, the moral law. And there I explained that Kant says the categorical imperative says act according to that maxim through which you can also want for it to become a universal law, which means that when you act, your maxim, that is your principle according to which you act, should be one that could be a universal law. In other words, that could be a principle according to which everyone acts. You should not make an exception for yourself, but rather you should act in a manner that could be universalized. Well, this is always what we need to ask ourselves. Does our principle, if put into a universal law, contradict itself? And Kant says, if we are in the state of nature, and we would say, I don't have a right to attack somebody who doesn't want to leave the state of nature. I don't have a right to force him out of the state of nature. If we were to universalize that, if we were to say everyone would act like that, then we would never leave the state of nature, right? If there is no right to force someone under the law, then no one would ever end up submitted to a law. And that would mean, if we were to make this principle a universal law, then lawlessness itself would become a law. Then it would be a moral law to keep lawlessness in place and to never establish lawfulness. And that is clearly a self-contradiction. So to Kant, it follows that there is this right to enforce lawfulness. And indeed, since I already mentioned Kant's visualism, many people who don't truly understand the visualism of a philosopher like Kant or like Fichte, and who don't really understand their idealism, many such people who wrongfully criticize them will be surprised if for once they step away from their prejudices and look at what these philosophers have actually written. They will be surprised by their great realism, which is not a contradiction with idealism. Because Kant is very much aware that historically, in the foundation of states, violence did indeed come first. He would say that sure, what reason actually demands of people, what would be our moral duty in the state of nature, is to voluntarily come together, form a social contract, and enter a civil state where everyone's rights are confirmed and protected. But Kant is not so naive as to think this is what actually happened. No, he's quite aware that in the actual history it did not happen as would have been the most moral thing to happen, as would have been demanded by reason, but rather in actual history he is aware that violence came first. That at first people were violently subjugated and forced into some state, forced into some empires, and that the actual right, actual justice, is not something that comes at the beginning, at the foundation of states, but rather if it comes, then it comes at the end of a long centuries or even millennia long progress, where we continuously fight to make our states that we already find ourselves in, to make them more just. The order of nature wants that before the right there come violence and coercion. For without those, man could not even be brought to the point of uniting forgiving laws. But the order of reason wants that afterwards the law shall regulate freedom and bring it into forms. This original act of violence, through which the state of nature is first ended and a state is created, cannot be against the right, Kant would say, because it is only through this act that right is established in the first place. It cannot be unjust, since it is what creates justice. Now, I would say that while this is correct, it is again one of those instances where Kant, if he had thought a little further, a little more thoroughly about this, could have realized the difference between morality and right, and that they don't belong with each other. Because I would say with Fichte that yes, this violence that creates a state in the first place cannot be unjust, because justice only comes about through the state. Before that, there are no rights against which could be violated by this violence. But whether it is moral or not, that is an entirely different question. You could, of course, still say in the state of nature that attacking someone is immoral, and that you, if you so to say, want to retain your purity of soul, would rather abstain from this right you have to force someone into a state, that you could still say, because morality and right are not the same. But as a right, you can someone attack to force him under a law. And the point here is that you have this right because, as I said earlier, simply being in the state of nature already does injustice to other people. And they don't have to put up with that. They don't have to put up with you being a constant, at least potential threat to them. I mean, just think about it. If you live alongside someone, if you live with someone as your neighbor, and you asked him, do you promise to never murder me, to never steal from me? And the neighbor refused to promise that, but then would get mad at you and say, oh, what's your problem? So far I haven't attacked you, I haven't killed you, I haven't stolen from you, so why do you need my promise? Maybe he is right. Maybe he is genuine. Maybe he really does not want to ever attack you. But precisely in that case, I would ask him, why not give me the promise? Why not guarantee it to me? I mean, what would you lose if you don't plan to do this anyways? The only reason why you would not do it is because you want to retain the possibility, if an opportunity arises, to attack me after all. And that's something I don't have to accept. If someone wants to live alongside me, I can demand a guarantee from that person that I will never have my rights violated. And all of this leads me to one last important point, and that is that Kant says you never have a right to leave or to destroy a state. Of course, that is as long as you want to keep living there. Like, if you leave the land of the state, that's another matter. You can, of course, move away, move to some other part of the earth, and then you can also leave the legal community. Then you can leave your citizenship behind. But as long as you keep living in a certain area where there already is a state, and you were, let's say, born into that state, then you have no right to destroy this state or to leave this state, to go back to the state of nature, to say to your neighbors, I consider myself no longer part of this state, no longer bound by its laws. Now, to be clear here, Kant is not saying that you cannot criticize the state in the form of the government that the state has, or in the form of the laws that the state has. Those you can criticize, and those you can try to change, to reform, to transform. Maybe the current laws are somehow unjust, and you try to make them more just. That is okay. Indeed, Kant does say that, of course, the states should constantly be improved, and there should be the possibility for improving. That is exactly why Kant is for free speech, so that if there are problems, if there are unjust laws in the state, they can freely be criticized, and then that criticism can be taken up by others and they can be improved. That is something I will talk about as I get into the state right, the first level of the public right. But what you cannot do, you can attack, maybe even radically attack the government or the laws, but you cannot attack the state as such. So Kant would say you can never say that the state as such is illegitimate and that you are not bound by its laws. And that is very important because, let's face it, you could claim that any state we have is illegitimate. on historical grounds. I already said Kant is very realistic, not in spite of, but because of his idealism. Not only does he acknowledge that all the states were created originally through violence, but he would even go so far as to say it couldn't have come about in any other way. Because he's aware that this social contract is just a fiction of reason. But actually, in the state of nature, people cannot come together to sit down together and to form a contract together, to found a state together. Because that would require peace and justice to already be in place, right? How could they come together in peace if they are still in the state of perpetual war? How could they form a contract with each other if they are still in a state where you cannot trust somebody else's promise because there's no state, no institution enforcing that they keep it? So Kant would say it was necessary that at first people were conquered, were subjugated, were forced into states. Otherwise, states could not have come about. But still, to have a state, even a non-perfect and unjust state, is better than having no state at all. And as I said, you could question the legitimacy of any state if you go back far enough. I mean, if it's states that have a longer history, then sure, their origin may be somewhat lost in history. But clearly it was not a rightful origin. Like, let's take my state, the German state. You could ask, why should there be a Germany? How is Germany a legitimate state? How does this state, so to say, have a right to exist? And then, of course, you could say, well, this state was founded in 1871 when the various states like Prussia, like Saxony, like Bavaria, like Württemberg, when they all united and chose to merge into one German empire, making the Prussian king their emperor. And you could say that this was a proper legal act, that the governments, the princes of those various states had any right to merge with each other. Okay, fair enough. So the origin of Germany was justified, was rightful. But then what about those states that did found Germany? Where did they come from? So why was, you can say, okay, Bavaria, Prussia, and so on, they had a right to merge. But did Bavaria, did Prussia, did Saxony have a right to exist? And here you would have to go back, of course, to like the Middle Ages or earlier, but then you will find that at some point there was violence, right? Like this land here where I live, Berlin, in Eastern Germany, all of Eastern Germany used to be Slavic till like 1,000 years ago, and then it was conquered. This was not done by right, this was done by violence. Likewise, if you turn to other older countries in Europe, like let's say England. Why is England a legitimate state? You could question that. I mean, you could discuss where England started to exist. I mean, do you want to say that this English state that we have started with the Norman conquest? Well, that was a conquest, right? That was not a rightful act. Or do you want to say that there was an earlier state by the Anglo-Saxons that the Normans just took over, but they didn't found a new state? Okay, fair enough. But then that earlier state was created through violence. And likewise, if you turn to the US, the point is, Kant would say, some Native American living in the US nowadays has no right to say, well, this land used to belong to my ancestors, European colonists stole it, and they used violence to acquire this land, and then they founded their state here. So this state is illegitimate. So therefore, I refuse to follow the laws of the United States, and I will now fight to abolish the United States and to erect some new state of my tribe, of whatever tribe I may belong to. This would not be okay. Because Kant would agree, yes, it was unjust, it was violent of the Europeans to come there, to steal the land, to settle it, to found their state on that. Indeed, Kant actually was for rights for the Native Americans. He supported when Native Americans rebelled. But now this has been done. There are no Native American legal communities, like no states left. There is all the land between Mexico and Canada, there is the United States of America. And Native Americans that are still alive nowadays are citizens of it. So they should accept that. That does not mean that they cannot fight for reforming that state. They can, of course, fight against legal discriminations they face. They can also fight maybe for some sorts of reparations if they think that this would be just. But what they cannot do is simply on the basis that this state does not have a just origin, they cannot say that they now refuse to be part of that state. Here, their neighbors would have any right, that is, the state would have any right to force them to submit to the state and its laws after all. The same could be said when it comes to Israel. I mean, to be sure, the origin of Israel is an unjust one. This cannot be questioned. I mean, it is, of course, questioned by Israel's apologists, but that just shows that they are evil people and also in large parts stupid people. Not necessarily stupid like by birth because they're simply dumb, but stupid because that's what ideology does to you. Ideology always makes people stupid. No, of course, you cannot really question Israel's settler colonial origin. That's simply what it was. Europeans coming there into a land that wasn't theirs. And I don't want anyone telling me, oh, it was theirs because their ancestors came from there 2,000 years ago. I mean, if we go with that, then all of us would have a right to go to Africa and to conquer Africa and to settle Africa because all our ancestors came from there. No, people from Europe whose land this wasn't came into this land, took it from the people, from the native indigenous people that lived there, and founded their state there and drove many people away in the Nakba and committed the crime of ethnic cleansing. Clearly that was an unjust act, but still Kant would probably say to the 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel nowadays, you now happen to be part of this state. You were now born probably into this state. And so therefore you have to accept this state. Again, this does not mean that you have to accept this state in its current condition. You could fight for changing it. You could fight for ending the apartheid, for being a fully equal citizen and not just a second-class citizen. You could fight maybe even for ending Israel as a Jewish state, because in the very fact that it is a Jewish state, the apartheid is already implicated, right? How could a non-Jew in a Jewish state ever be anything more than, at best, a tolerated second-class citizen? So sure, you can fight for Israel no longer being a Jewish state. And maybe that would also probably involve the state being renamed to something else, maybe to the state of Palestine. Maybe that would probably imply the state changing its flag to not longer have the Star of David. You could fight for the current state of Israel, encompassing all the land between the river and the sea. I mean, factually, it already does. We have a one-state reality already. Israel does control all the land, but you could fight for it also legally controlling all the land, but then not as an oppressor, not as a Jewish state where then half the people would have no rights as citizens, but rather you could fight for it to transform into one Palestinian state between river and sea, which is a state for all its citizens. You could fight for that. But what you could not do is to simply say, okay, since I am a Palestinian, since this land used to belong to my people, and since it was stolen, since the state has an unjust origin, I now simply denounce my citizenship while still living here, not while moving away. And I now simply refuse to follow the laws of this state, so I re-enter the state of nature. That you mustn't do, Kant would say. Of course, this goes for the, I want to stress, this goes just for the Palestinians that are citizens of Israel. Of course, the others, the ones in the West Bank, the ones in the Gaza Strip, since they are not citizens of any state, so they are essentially still in the state of nature, they of course have this aforementioned right to fight a just war. That is, they have any right in the world to attack Israel and to force Israel to enter some sort of legal contract with them. Again, a just war cannot be a war for extermination, so they don't have a right to fight a war against Israel with the goal of, if they win, driving all the Jewish citizens away, saying you have no right to live here. But they do have a right to fight a war with Israel with the goal of forcing Israel to either accept the West Bank and Gaza as a Palestinian state, or to accept some sort of one state where they would then live alongside each other as equal citizens. That's a right, of course, those Palestinians have because they are still in the state of nature. And to be clear, of course, from Kant's theory, Israel, from the other side, would also have that right. Again, because they, with the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, are in the state of nature. So what they would have to do is offer them a social contract, offer them to either be full citizens in one single state, or offer them to be citizens of their own state and to then enter some sort of peace treaty between the two states. And if they refuse that, if the Palestinians didn't agree to any sort of legal contract, to any sort of peace with the Israelis, then Israel would indeed have a right to attack them, but once again, only with the goal not of committing genocide, not of exterminating them, but only with the goal of forcing them into a shared legal framework. And let me stress that it would not have to come that far, because while Israel has never recognized Palestine, the Palestinians, in the form of the PLO, did recognize Israel. And even Hamas was at several points willing to do that, to enter some sort of contract with Israel. So clearly Israel has no right to attack them at this point, because it's not that the Palestinians refuse to enter some sort of civil state and to leave the state of nature. It's that Israel refuses that. But if the Palestinians refuse, Israel would have a right to attack them, just like now the Palestinians as such have a right to attack Israel, according to Kant. But anyways, the important point, once again, is that Kant would say having a state, even an unjust state, even a state with imperfect laws, is better than being in the state of nature, because the state of nature is in itself necessarily unjust. And by insisting on being in the state of nature, by insisting of not being under a law that gives your neighbor a guarantee to be safe from you, you are already committing an injustice towards that neighbor. And that is why, once again, we can criticize the government, we can criticize the laws, but we should not refuse to recognize the state as such simply because its origin was unjust. Here, Kant says, a law which is so wholly inviolable that to practically even cast doubt on it, that is to suspend its effect for a moment, already constitutes a crime, is conceived as if it must come not from man, but rather from some highest, impeccable lawgiver. And that is the meaning of the statement, the powers that be are ordained of God, which does not state a historical foundation of the civil constitution, but an idea of the practical principle of reason. To ought to obey the law-giving power now existing, its origin may be whatever it may be. And all of this is more than just abstract philosophical considerations that don't matter much. All of that, if we take it seriously, has very real repercussions for very real political and legal issues. So at the end of all of this, let me just mention, here in Germany, in the last couple years, in the last decade or so, we have seen the rise of so-called Reichsbürger, that is, citizens of the Reich, citizens of the empire. That is a particular brand of right-wingers who believe that the German state as it exists now, that is the Federal Republic of Germany, does not truly exist, that it is not a legitimate state, and that instead the German Empire, the German Reich, still exists. So they are conspiracy theorists. There's also lots of overlap between them and other conspiracy people. So many of those Reichsbürger probably also believe in chemtrails, or many of them were amongst those COVID conspiracy theorists. But they share their own conspiracy theory, and that is that they say that the German Reich, that is the first German state that existed, the one that was created in 1871 when the German states unified under Prussia, the one that first was an empire, and then after losing the First World War became a republic for some years, and then where the Nazis rose to power, and the one that was then defeated by the Allies in 1945. They are saying that the Allies might have defeated that state, but there was never a proper legal abolishment of that state. There was never a proper peace treaty, and that state was never legally transformed into the new Federal Republic of Germany. Rather, the state, they say, the German Reich, keeps existing, even though it is defunct, even though, according to them, it is occupied and its institutions were destroyed. They say that legally it was not abolished, therefore it keeps existing. And the Federal Republic of Germany was just founded on top of it, on its occupied land, and is an illegitimate state. Now, a lot of the things they say are very laughable. A lot of the arguments are outright stupid. Like they will often claim that the Germany we have now is no state at all, not even an illegitimate one. They will claim it's a corporation. And then they will say stuff like, oh, it's not a real state because we don't have a constitution. We just have a basic law. Right? Like the German constitution is called the basic law, Grundgesetz in German. But that's just a name. It's still the constitution. I mean, our inland intelligence service is called Verfassungsschutz. Verfassung being the German word for constitution. So it's the defenders of the constitution. And they are usually not aware that there are states like Great Britain that indeed have no constitution. Like the constitution is not what makes the state. Or even more stupid, they will say stuff like, in German, your ID card is called Personalausweis. So the personal ID. Or the proof of person. Ausweisen means to prove yourself. And Personal, however, is also what we call the people working at the company, the employees. They are the Personal of that company. So now the Reichsbürger say, oh, it's called Personalausweis that proves that Germany is not a state but a company. This is something I always find funny with conspiracy theories, that on the one hand, the conspirators seem to be almost all powerful, but then on the other hand, they cannot refuse leaving obvious signs, right? Same when the Illuminati allegedly leave their sign on the dollar bill. Like, if they really control America, why don't they just keep it secret? Why would they put their sign out there? If Germany really is a company, why put it in the very name of the ID card? Why not just keep it a secret? It's not so hard to hide that. But be that as it may, those stupid arguments aside, the main argument, maybe as a strictly legal argument, maybe it has some merit. Maybe indeed the old German Empire was never officially abolished and dissolved. Maybe the new Federal Republic is indeed, in the strict legal sense, not a proper successor of that former German state. But I would say it would be the greatest possible error to enter into that discussion with them. Rather, you should just tell them, what does this matter? What does this matter when clearly the Federal Republic is a state for all intents and purposes? Clearly it is a functioning state. So you should accept living in this state. Maybe the way this state was founded was not completely just, was not completely correct in legal terms, but now it's here, and now it's the only state we have. So you should accept it. And You can, of course, try to change it. Like many of these Reichsbürger want the monarchy back. They say Germany should be an empire again. Okay. You can work towards that. You can try to convince others of that. But what you cannot do is not accept this state. And I think, and I've been thinking and saying that for years now, that it should be illegal to be a Reichsbürger. That the German state should not wait till these people commit crimes, which they do. I mean, at some point they have tried to, that was during the COVID protests, they've tried to storm the parliament. Not quite unlike the storm of the Capitol by those MAGA people in the US some years ago. So less prominent, less reported about. Likewise, they have, in some cases, they have killed people. They have planned terrorist attacks. They have planned a coup d'etat, a violent takeover of the government. They have tried to contact Putin and to get his support for a violent takeover of the government and his recognition for the new German empire that they would then found. They have made plans for abducting prominent politicians like ministers. Like during COVID, once again, people wanted to abduct the health minister. So clearly, they are dangerous. They are committing criminal acts. And also what they are trying to do is they just don't recognize Germany. So they refuse to pay taxes. They refuse to pay fines if they parked wrongly. And they try to create their own parallel state. Like they give out their own ID cards, their own driver's licenses, saying that they are the true legitimate government of the occupied German Reich. And this is something that the state doesn't need to tolerate, I say. Of course, the state largely does tolerate it, because the state is completely toothless against such people. And I mean, this is in line with the rest of our politics, right? Politicians basically in the face of any threat nowadays choose to just do nothing, right? The threat of Muscovy at the doors of Europe, we do basically nothing about it. Send a few weapons to Ukraine, but that's all. The threat of the climate crisis, we do basically nothing about it. Go to some climate conferences, maybe insult the host country, but that's basically all. And likewise, the threat of the Reichsbürger, we basically do nothing about it. But what I am saying is that going with Kant, we would have the right, that is what reason says, we would have the right to punish people for being Reichsbürger. And not just to give them any small punishment. Going with Kant, I would say these people should be considered people who are committing high treason. Because, well, they are denying the existence and the legitimacy of the state. So they should receive the highest possible punishment that there is within our legal framework. They should be locked up forever. And the point here is, someone might say, oh, but that is within freedom of speech. Even if you don't like their opinion, they should still, as long as they don't commit actual crimes, they should have the right to say that opinion. And to that I say no. This is not an opinion. This is already, if I say the state doesn't exist, this is already an action. If I say the state as it is now should be changed, that is an opinion. And there I would agree they should have freedom of speech. Of course, even extremist views, even views that clearly make anyone who holds them scum of the earth, should be legal to express. Of course. I'm not talking about locking up other kinds of right-wingers, other kinds of Nazis, simply for being Nazis. I'm talking about locking up specifically this brand of right-wingers that says there is no state, that says we don't recognize the state. It's one thing to say, I don't believe in freedom of speech, leftist people should be banned from saying their opinion, or I don't believe in freedom of faith, Mohammedans should be banned from practicing their faith, or I don't believe in equality, Jews should not have equal rights. If you say that, then okay, you are scum, but it's an opinion. As long as you say, but right now there is freedom of speech, there is freedom of faith, there is equality. Right now these laws are in place, so right now I have to respect those laws. I want to change them. I think those laws are wrong, but right now they are in place, so right now I have to follow those laws. As long as you say that, the leftist, the Mohammedan, the Jew will probably hate you, and rightfully so, for your opinions. But they can still feel somewhat safe in your presence. But the moment you don't just say these laws should be changed, but rather these laws don't really exist, because the state in which this is law is no true, is no legitimate state, is no state I recognize, that moment, the leftist, the Mohammedan, the Jew cannot feel safe in your presence, even if you have not directly attacked them yet. And we don't have to expect these people to accept your presence, if this is indeed your position. Because what you are saying is that there are no laws in place that give these people rights and that protect these people from you. Not just laws that you dislike, that you would like to change, but the laws already don't exist for you. And again, this is how the Reichsbürger actually act. They don't recognize the state's laws. They try to refuse taxes and so on. And they also acknowledge that they need to first enter the state of nature, right? There's a big overlap between the Reichsbürger and the preppers in Germany, and many of them are prepping, they are hoarding stuffs, they are hoarding food for the day X, and they want there to be a civil war. They expect there to someday, when enough of the people are fed up with the immigrants, with the refugees, to someday be a civil war. And they are preparing for that. They are trying to get weapons, which thankfully is a bit harder here than in the US, but unfortunately there are Reichsbürger amongst the army, amongst the police. Denying that this state exists doesn't prevent them from working for the state, and they have smuggled out some weapons, and they are awaiting civil war. And so they are very much aware and very much admitting that they have to violently destroy this state, that they have to re-enter the state of nature where there are no laws at all, where it is outright war of all against all. And maybe then, once they won, they can create a new state with new laws. And this is, according to Kant, according to reason, this is unjust. You can try to transform the state in which you live. You can try to turn it from a republic into a monarchy, okay. But what you mustn't try is abolishing the state as such, returning to the state of nature, even if later on you want to create a new state. And even if you were right that this new state is somehow better, somehow more just, that doesn't matter. The intermediate period would be a period of lawlessness, would be a period of the state of nature and of the war of all against all, and this by itself is injustice. You are not allowed to ever leave the state, again, as long as you still live there with the other people. If you leave it physically, okay, that's one thing, but you are not allowed, if you are physically remaining there, to leave the legal community that once you entered. And I would end to what Kant says there, that this should go not just on the level of the state right, but also on the level of international rights. So again, the Nazis leaving the League of Nations should have been the moment war was declared on them. Just like nowadays, Hungary leaving the Rome Statute, leaving the International Court of Justice, the other European countries should declare war on them and put Orban in The Hague for that. But this is what Kant says. In conclusion, he's saying the state of nature by itself is an injustice, because by not giving your neighbor a guarantee that you will not violate his rights, you are already violating his rights, because you are forcing him to live with constant insecurity, with the constant threat of an attack. And that gives him the right to, if you don't agree to enter a legal framework, to attack you and to force you under a law. And so, since in the state of nature we have this duty of neminem, leadere, harm no one, but the state of nature as such harms people, we also have this duty to leave the state of nature. Suum, cuique, tribue. Give to each his own, that is, give to each the guarantee of his rights. Move from the commutative justice to the distributive justice. Now, so much about the public law in general, why there should be one, why we need a public law, why it is itself a duty to enter the public law or the public right. Of course, I have not yet talked about the actual content of that public right. I've already said it has these three levels: state-wide, nations-wide, cosmopolitan-wide, and of course I intend to talk about what Kant says about all three of them. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Thomas Doringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.